argue to people that he really is the one to form the next coalition.
It's interesting, isn't it? Some of the senior figures within that party already publicly saying, no, it can't be Lachette. So they're already looking to move on. And yet, Damien, when you look at the Free Democrats and the Greens, the leader of the Free Democrats has said, well, to be honest, I would sooner work with the CDU. So how does that all piece together?
Yeah, so the Liberals are pro-market, they are low-tax, pro-business. So their natural fit would be with the Conservative coalition. 4 years ago, that's where they were going. That was the big story with the Conservatives. Those coalition talks failed. The reason why the Liberals are now talking more openly, yesterday they did an incredible thing by already saying we're going to talk to the Greens. That's unheard of. That the smaller junior parties would start saying, okay, this is the way we're going to coalition talks. Usually it'd be the winner that would open those negotiations. So that is unusual. The Greens have said likewise. That's because they know where the numbers have fallen, and the numbers have fallen to a centre-left-led governing coalition. And what we're talking about now is some very pragmatic negotiations. Already this morning in the media, but the leaders of the Liberals and the Greens were saying, okay, we're going to be pragmatic. We're going to see what direction we as a team can move forward. And these two parties, on the surface, they seem very different. One high tax, one low tax. In reality, they've been talking behind the scenes for years. They have set up this group which has been meeting for cocktails in a West Berlin bar since the last collapse of those talks between the two to figure out where they can have a meeting of minds. And they do have issues where they come together. They want modernisation, they want digitalisation. They're both open to migration, for example. So they have a lot of similarities, and it's those similarities they're going to try and focus on, really, I think.
Okay, well, the SPD have made the first move on the chessboard, it would seem. We perhaps wait to see if Armin Laschet of the CDU makes the second move, possibly a defensive one, but the coalition talks are just beginning to take some shape.
Tough coalition talks are underway in Germany as the post-Merkel era begins. The Social Democrats, led by Olaf Scholz, have claimed a narrow victory in national elections. It's the first time in almost 2 decades that they'll be leading Europe's largest economy. But they need help. They're looking to form an alliance with 2 other parties.
Die Wählerinnen und Wähler haben auch sehr klar gesprochen. Sie haben gesagt, wer die nächste Regierung bilden soll. Sie hat 3 Parteien gestärkt, die Sozialdemokratische Partei, die Grünen und die FDP. Und deshalb ist das der sichtbare Auftrag, den die Bürgerinnen und Bürger dieses Landes formuliert haben. Diese 3 sollen auch die nächste Regierung führen.
Trent Murray joins us live now for more on this development. Trent, how long are these coalition talks expected to drag on for?
Yeah, well, Dawn, if history tells us anything, it could be quite a while. Speaking after the results first started to filter out last night, both of the main parties said they'd like to see coalition negotiations wrap up by at least Christmas, but party insiders are saying that is an optimistic view. In fact, it could take much longer. The reason for that is because really we are trying to bridge differences here between parties that have very different outlooks on Germany's challenges and the challenges of the world. As you mentioned, in order to try and get a majority in that building behind me there in Parliament, either the Conservative CDU or the left-wing Social Democrats are going to need to form a 3-way coalition with the Green Party and with the FDP, which is a pro-business kind of small government party. They all have quite different outlooks on the way they'd like to do things. The Greens, for example, would like to see an increase in renewable energy as well as major investment in Germany's infrastructure to fight the climate crisis, whereas the FDP, they don't want to see any more tax rises, and they also don't want to see Germany's debt cap raised at all. So you can probably pick up a theme there, Dawn. One party wants to spend a lot of money, the other party wants to save a lot of money. Trying to get them in together is going to be difficult, meaning these negotiations could go on for quite a while, and Angela Merkel will have to stay in place as a caretaker chancellor while that happens.
So different imperatives for different parties, Trent, but what changes can we really expect after nearly 2 decades of Angela Merkel's Conservative government?
Look, I think in the immediate term you won't see any major radical shifts from Germany in the way it likes to deal with its partners around the world. Olaf Scholz from the centre-left Democrats, it is worth saying, has worked alongside Angela Merkel as her finance minister in a coalition government for the past 8 years. So he has been at the decision-making table for all of Germany's major foreign policy challenges of recent times, and he has said he would like to pretty well continue on the same course. Big on transatlanticism, i.e. working with Washington, but also turning much of the focus to the Indo-Pacific, where Germany is showing an increased interest with a new strategy it recently released. But it's worth noting that, of course, that's his view, but in order to get those smaller parties on board, he will need to make concessions to them. We already know from Christian Lindner, the leader of the FDP, that he would like Germany to take a tougher line on China, for example. He recently said that Germany can't be separating the issues of business and human rights like it has under Angela Merkel, and that Germany needs to, quote, stop dealing with China with children's gloves on. So it could be a challenging period foreign policy-wise. Either side is going to need to make concessions, and so it is worth watching what changes could happen as those concessions are made.
Trent, thank you very much. Trent Murray there in Berlin.
It's the home stretch of Germany's federal election campaign, and Angela Merkel's exactly where she didn't want to be, back on the campaign trail. The outgoing chancellor of 16 years, seen here Tuesday in her home constituency on the Baltic Sea, stumping for her struggling would-be successor. Head of the Christian Democrats, Armin Laschet. Other potential heirs have stumbled before him. Is it down to Laschet? Or has the woman who's been the dominant force in German and, dare we say, European politics all these years, sucked the oxygen from the room? In fact, polls suggest that voters want the candidate that's most like Merkel. And that just might be Vice Chancellor and Finance Minister Olaf Scholz. He's the pragmatic center-left former mayor of Hamburg. How much a revival for the Social Democrats? Germans, by the way, do the opposite of the French. First, they pick a coalition, then they decide on a platform, and finally they agree on names. Some quip that on the Monday morning that follows the vote in Germany, ballots are counted. That's when it really begins to get interesting. This will be the first coalition formed since Brexit, a further ratcheting of tensions between the US and China, and of course that pandemic that's even seen Berlin bust the lid on spending caps. If, like last time, it takes months to form a government, it's not the Germans but all of Europe that will be holding its breath. How long can we afford to wait? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking who to fill Merkel's shoes. With us, Cornelia Vaux, professor of political science at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Thanks for being with us. From Berlin, CDU campaigner Jens Fischer, who's a debate coach. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
From Stuttgart, Michael Bloss, member of the European Parliament for the Greens. Well, thank you for being with us.
Hello.
From Brussels, Sophie Braunschlegel, senior policy analyst at the European Policy Center think tank. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. We can show you images there of the German national anthem played at that Tuesday campaign rally in the northern port of Stralsund. Angela Merkel on home turf to sell that would-be successor.
As German Chancellor, Armin Laschet would continue the course of attracting new jobs here and make employment possible.
Your reaction, Cornelia Vaux, to those images?
Well, it is interesting to see her back on the campaign trail, and it's also the decision to actually throw her weight in for Armin Laschet shows that he's in difficulty and that he's not so sure that he is her natural successor. It's of course the same party family, but in a way Olaf Scholz, who is in the government right now, feels more like the incumbent and seems to signal more a continuation for those who don't want experiments.
Is he in difficulty of his own doing, or is it her fault?
It's an excellent question. I would say that it's his own doing, and in a way his campaign has not taken off the way he hoped it it would have. And what we also see is there were moments in the campaign, in particular the summer months and the floods, that have not been in his favor and that have really changed the projections in the turnaround that we've just experienced in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, Jens Fischer, that moment where he was, Armin Laschet was caught on camera chuckling or laughing, and people interpreted it as him taking lightly what was going on with those floods. Do you agree with Cornelia that it is Laschet that's perhaps the problem?
I disagree with him being the problem. I think the Chancellor is right that he would be the correct choice. That probably is not a surprise. The images were very unfortunate, and I think media has a role to play in this. The questions that were asked, the topics that were raised, also in the hardly called dual situation with three candidates for Chancellor, all of those lacked